The challenge of Nigeria as a free state in 20th century Africa is the need to revive the stature of man in Africa and restore the dignity of man in the world. Nigerians believe passionately in the fundamental human rights. We regard all races of the human family as equal. Under no circumstance shall we accept the idea that the black race is inferior to any other race.
1960, Nigerian independence.
When Nigeria achieved independence from British colonial rule on the 1st of October 1960, the prospect appeared promising and the expectations for the future of the new country were high. Buoyed largely by the discovery of commercial quantities of petroleum in the south, the potential for economic growth was great. But by 1970, the stability of the country was greatly damaged by a decade of corruption, economic underdevelopment, regionalism, and military coups, culminating in a 2.5-year war that saw the deaths of over 2 million people. This project consists of 4 separate videos that look at the events that almost led to the destruction of Nigeria. In the first video, we'll look at how it all began. The British laid the borders of modern-day Nigeria in 1914 when the government, under Sir Frederick Lugard, amalgamated its Islamic Northern and Christianized Southern Protectorate to form a unified colonial state. Thereupon, the people within this border were known to the world as Nigerians, but in reality, this name meant little to most of the indigenous people whose lives continued to be primarily centered on local communities that existed for hundreds and thousands of years. The first 3 decades of the 20th century saw the establishment of the British colonial administration in Nigeria. Along with it came transformations to the Nigerian economy and societies. But while the colonial system brought some material benefits to the country, it also alienated and frustrated most Nigerians who felt exploited and believed that the government had eroded culture and tradition. In the early 1920s, some European-educated Nigerians began to push for greater control over their governance. At the forefront was this man, Sir Albert Macaulay, a civil engineer turned journalist who organized protests in Lagos and other parts of Nigeria, indicating a strong antagonism towards colonial rule. These events resulted in the Clifford Constitution of 1923, which allowed more Nigerians in a newly formed legislative council. The 1930s saw the emergence of a new generation of anti-colonial activists calling for a greater involvement of Nigerians in governance. Led by charismatic visionaries and dominated by the ever-growing class of European-educated Nigerians, this new nationalist movement placed increasing pressures on the colonial government for an end to colonial rule. With the highest concentration of Western-educated Nigerians at that time, Lagos, the colonial capital, was the nucleus of this movement. Before the 1930s, Macaulay and his Nigerian National Democratic Party had dominated the political spectrum in Lagos. But in the early 30s, this new generation of intellectuals would form an organization that would challenge Macaulay's control. This organization was known as the Lagos Youth Movement, which later became the Nigerian Youth Movement in 1934. It began as a body that demanded quality educations for Nigerians, but in the space of 4 years, it became the most powerful nationalist movement in the country. By 1938, the Nigerian Youth Movement had spread beyond Lagos to many parts of Nigeria, having a combined membership of over 10,000. In 1945, Nigerian workers struck for 37 days over the increase in the cost of living, shutting down postal, railway, and telegraph services around the country in the process. A new organization, the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons (NCNC), was an active participant in the strike. The strike ended when the colonial government met the demands of the workers, but this new organization would become a force in the nationalist struggle for Nigeria unity and self-governance. Its leader, Nnamdi Azikiwe, was the most influential Nigerian nationalist that emerged in the 30s. His great sense of solidarity took him to the leadership of the Nigerian Youth Movement. But in 1941, Azikiwe would leave the Nigerian Youth Movement over a dispute concerning a legislative election he felt was marred by ethnic rivalry. He left along with a large percentage of members to confound the NCNC with Albert Macaulay. The years between 1945 and 1954 saw the introduction of three new constitutions in Nigeria. The first, known as the Richard's Constitution, revamped the Legislative Council and allowed Nigerians as the majority for the first time. Under the constitution, Nigeria became a three-region federal state, having houses of assemblies in each region and a central legislature based in Lagos. Although the Richard's Constitution intended to promote unity among Nigerians, it ended up intensifying regional identities. The NCNC, which started as a leading nationalist organization based on its pan-Nigerian motivations, soon became regionally inclined, becoming the single most influential body among the Igbos in the East. The Nigerian youth movement soon fell under the leadership of a wealthy Yoruba cocoa farmer called Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Under Awolowo, the NYM became the Action Group, a Yoruba-dominated organization in the West. Awolowo became the leading proponent of Yoruba nationalism, focusing his energies on gaining Yoruba support in the Western region. In the North, the major cultural organization was the Hausa Fulani-inclined Northern People's Congress, founded in 1943 by three of the few Northerners who had attained high-standard European education at that time. The NPC sought to promote Northern unity and maintain regional autonomy. However, under the leadership of one man, the NPC would ultimately become the most influential organization in the North. This man was Alhaji Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto. In 1950, Sir John Macpherson, the colonial governor after Richards, made revisions to the Richards Constitution. His constitution, known as the Macpherson Constitution, expanded the regional assemblies and made provisions for the first general elections in the country. As the general election approached, the NCNC, the Action Group, and the MPC became full-fledged political parties in their various regions. In 1951, a controversy ensued between the leaders of the three regions on the issue of centralizing the government. This led to the Lillington Constitution of 1954, which managed to forge a middle path between the desires of the three regions. The constitution set up the federal system of government, under which Nigeria gained independence in 1960. In 1957, Sir Alhaji Tafawa Balewa of the NPC became Nigeria's Prime Minister. The final election that would determine the country's first independent government was conducted in 1959. The NPC got the largest number of seats, and the majority government was created through an NPC-NCNC coalition, making the Action Group the major opposition party. Alhaji Tafawa Balewa maintained his position as Prime Minister, and Nnamdi Azikiwe of the NCNC took a largely ceremonial title as Nigeria's first indigenous Governor General. On October 1, 1960, Nigeria became a full-fledged sovereign state. However, the foundations upon which it gained independence were not firm. The NPC-NCNC coalition that governed at the federal level quickly became dominated by the NPC, which, under the leadership of the federal prime minister and the northern premier, undertook measures to improve the conditions of northerners within the federation. They felt that the northern region should have a chance to catch up with the south after suffering deliberate underdevelopment during the colonial era. They regularly handed out appointments and promotions to underqualified northerners at the expense of more qualified southerners. Nearly all funds earmarked for defense, health, education, and roads went to projects in the north. This infuriated the southerners, especially the NCNC, who saw their skills disregarded by a federal system that increasingly seemed to value ethnicity over merit. In 1962, the Action Group of the Western region faced a crisis over its position as the opposition party. Some members believed that the party was becoming irrelevant at the national level and wanted to abandon their position as opposition party by becoming allies with the NPC. Among the adherents of this line of thought was Chief S.L. Akintola, who had succeeded Chief Awolowo as Premier of the Western region in 1959. Awolowo did not like this. He tried to have Akintola removed as Premier, replacing him with his ally, Chief Adegbenro. The result was a major parliamentary crisis between Awolowo and Akintola. At this point, Prime Minister Balewa, who hoped to align with Akintola and gain a foothold in the western region, declared a state of emergency in the west and suspended the Action Group government for 6 months, replacing it with an interim government. Akintola was reinstated as premier by the end of the 6 months, but the damage done on Awolowo's Action Group party would prove to be an irreversible one. In 1963, a new region was carved out of the west, further weakening the Action Group. Things will only go from bad to worse for the party because in the same year, Awolowo and several other leaders of the Action Group were imprisoned on charges of treason and corruption. The 1962 census presented an opportunity for the southern parties to enroll the MPC's control of the National Assembly. The number of seats allocated to each region in the Federal Assembly was based on the regional population, and from 1953, Northerners having the highest population constituted the majority. The southern governments realized that manipulating the figures would give them more seats in the Federal Assembly. When the figures were released, the eastern and the western region recorded an incredible 70% increase in population compared to a 30% increase in the north. Balewa refused to accept the results, and the following year, another census was conducted, and this time, it was the turn of the MPC to manipulate the results. 8 million new Northerners were miraculously discovered in 1 year. The NCNC bitterly opposed this result, but failed to prevent it from becoming official. The new population of the country officially stood at about 55 million, of whom 29 million resided in the north. Having lost the fight to gain control of the Federal Assembly, the political parties in the south now turned their energies towards winning the upcoming elections of 1964. The NCNC and the Action Group united with minority parties in the north to form the United Progressive Grand Alliance (UPGA). Intending to maintain the status quo, the MPC also merged with Akintola's newly formed Nigerian National Democratic Party and a few fringe parties in the south to form the Nigerian National Alliance (NNA). The campaigns leading up to the 1964 elections were abominable. In the north, the NNA arrested many UPGA officials and prevented their supporters from campaigning. In the western region, clashes between NNA and UPGA supporters often resulted in violence, claiming lives and properties in the process. The goal of the NNA was to prevent UPGA candidates from being nominated and stand for elections. In this way, they hoped to present many of their candidates as unopposed. Since the NNA officials controlled the election machineries in both the north and the west, they could easily hamper the nomination process for the UPGA candidates. Outraged by the intimidation they faced, UPGA officials called for a boycott of the election, but the boycott was a success only in the eastern region. As a result, many seats in the northern and the western regions went unopposed to the NNA. After the election, Balewa called Azikiwe to create an NNA-led government, but Azikiwe refused. He later allowed it when Balewa agreed to incorporate more UPGA members in his government, rescheduled the elections for the boycotted seats, and recontest the elections for the Western Regional Assembly the following year. The UPGA won most of the boycotted seats in the 1965 elections, but this was not enough to strengthen the majority claim of the NNA. In the end, the NNA won 198 of the 312 seats in the National Assembly. Although this was a clear victory, the conduct of the election had been disastrous, causing resentment amongst the UPGA supporters and causing many Nigerians to question the fairness of the country's democratic system. Nigerians' faith in their system of government, already weakened by the 1964 elections, was further strained by the Western Regional elections of October 1965. The election was a disaster. When the preliminary results were announced on October the 13th, Akintola and the NNDP claimed 51 seats to the UPGA's 11, with 30 seats still to be decided. Chief Adegbenro, the acting leader of the Action Group, immediately declared 68 victories for the UPGA and announced that he was forming an interim government. For this, Adegbenro and other leaders of the Action Group were arrested. Throughout November and December, UPGA supporters took to the streets to protest the election results. The riots were widespread, often resulting in clashes with the police. The Western region had turned into the Wild West. Rather than call a state of emergency in the western region, Balewa decided to send the army to the west, but it still wasn't enough to stop the crisis. The western region was out of control. Disgusted by the political mess the country was in after only 6 years of independence, a group of politically radical army officers took the bait. They decided that the only means out of the political deadlock was to execute a military revolution to overthrow the government. At the core was a group of young army officers in the rank of major. They planned to overthrow the government, release Chief Obafemi Awolowo from prison, and install him as president. In the early hours of January the 15th, 1966, they struck.